When Mira came to live with us, it didn't feel like an intrusion, it felt like home finally had its missing piece. She was my cousin, but we had grown up more like sisters. Our mothers were close, and every childhood summer was stitched together by matching dresses, mango-stained fingers, and secrets whispered beneath mosquito nets. So when she called one evening, her voice trembling with the weight of change, saying she needed a place to stay while she sorted out her new job in the city, my heart didn't hesitate. I remember the day she arrived. It was raining softly. The sky washed in a pale gray that blurred the outlines of the world. Mira stepped out of the cab with 2 large suitcases and that familiar grin that could melt the cold off any room. My husband, Raihan, ran out with an umbrella before I could. She looked up at him, surprised, and they both laughed as a gust of wind tried to snatch the umbrella from his hands. That laugh, that was the first thing I noticed. How light it sounded, how effortlessly it fell between them. Our home, once filled with our quiet routines, became warmer, louder. Mira would dance barefoot in the kitchen, music in her ears, while Raihan smiled from the living room, peeking over his book. She loved to cook, and he loved to eat. I would watch them from the hallway sometimes, the way they teased each other like old friends. I felt happy, I really did. It reminded me of my own beginning with Raihan, when we were still unfolding each other's stories. Mira brought light. She asked questions no one else bothered to ask anymore about Raihan's photography, about the dusty books in the corner shelf he'd never had time to read. She would sit with him on the balcony, the city blinking beneath them like a sea of fireflies, and they'd talk about dreams, about places they wanted to travel, about how time feels different when you're in your 30s. I didn't feel threatened. Not then. I felt grateful. After all, wasn't this what love looked like? Sharing space, warmth, stories. I would tuck myself into bed some nights with the soft sounds of their laughter down the hall, a gentle lullaby that told me, we are safe, we are loved. Sometimes though, I'd wake up in the early morning and find Raihan already in the kitchen, a second cup of coffee waiting on the counter. Mira would walk in moments later, still in her robe, eyes sleepy, like it was a rhythm they'd fallen into naturally. I'd smile and join them, brushing aside a strange pang in my chest that I couldn't name. At the time, I told myself it was just the adjustment, 3 adults living under one roof. But even in the warmth, there was a flicker of something else. Something too quiet to be called a warning. Something I would only later learn had a shape. The shift was almost imperceptible at first, like hairline cracks on a porcelain cup. Nothing you could point to, nothing you could name. Just a feeling, heavy and slow, settling between the moments that used to feel natural. Mira began dressing differently. Not provocatively, never that. Just more intentional. Soft silks that caught the morning light, warm tones that echoed the palette of our living room. I told myself it was the city's influence, that she was finding herself again. But the way Raihan noticed his gaze lingering just a second too long before turning away, it etched something sharp into my awareness. He started laughing more around her. Real laughter, the kind I hadn't heard in months. And it wasn't that we were unhappy. Raihan and I had our quiet harmony. But Mira brought something unfiltered into the room. I watched as he leaned in when she spoke, as if the world narrowed to the space between them. I watched, and I told myself not to. Some evenings, they'd sit across from each other at the dining table, talking long after I'd excused myself. I'd hear their voices carry down the hallway, low and warm, weaving through stories I was no longer part of. Once, I came back out to find them both with their heads close together, looking at his camera. She was laughing, a finger brushing the edge of his wrist. They looked up suddenly when I entered. Raihan cleared his throat. Mira stood a little too quickly. I tried to dismiss it, tried to believe the stories I whispered to myself. They're just close. She's family. He's kind. I'm imagining this. But doubt is a quiet seed. It doesn't shout. It sits in the dark and grows. I began noticing the spaces where I no longer fit. They'd make inside jokes I didn't understand. Raihan would mention conversations I'd never been part of. Mira started anticipating his moods, bringing him his favorite tea before he even asked, finishing his sentences in that casual, practiced way that made me feel like I was watching a play I hadn't been invited to rehearse. One morning, I walked into the living room and found Mira asleep on the couch, his hoodie wrapped around her like a second skin. Raihan was already gone for work. I stood there for a long time, not angry, not sad, just hollow. Like someone had rearranged the furniture of my life while I was sleeping. I didn't say anything. I smiled when she woke up. I made breakfast. I folded the hoodie and left it on his side of the bed. But something in me pulled back that day, like a thread unspooling from the hem of a favorite dress, and still, I kept pretending. Because to question it out loud would have made it real. And I wasn't ready for real yet. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was 1,000 small ones. The silence between their laughter. The way my name would fall quieter in their conversations. The way Mira began saying we when talking about things she and Raihan had done, errands, films, even grocery runs I used to accompany him on. One night, I stood at the doorway of the kitchen unseen. They were standing close to close, sharing the last of the mangoes I had bought that morning. He wiped a smear of juice from her cheek, his thumb gentle against her skin. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just looked at him like he was the only person in the world. My breath caught. I stepped away before they saw me. I never mentioned it, but something in me folded inward, like paper under flame. The distance between Raihan and me grew, but not in fights or silence. He was still kind, still asked about my day, still touched my back when I walked past him. But there was no weight to it anymore. No pause, no searching. I'd lie beside him at night and feel like a photograph taped to the wall, present, but flat. He still reached for me in sleep, but even his arms felt borrowed. Mira had started staying out later, saying she was meeting friends or catching up on freelance work at cafes. But I knew. I didn't know what I knew, but I knew. There was a change in the air when she walked in at night. Her eyes flickered past mine. Her smile was delayed. And sometimes when I looked at her, I saw someone I didn't recognize. Someone who wanted something too much to pretend otherwise. I found a notebook once in her room while tidying. A small one, floral cover, tucked beneath her pillow. I hadn't meant to open it, but my hand moved before my conscience could stop me. I only read a few lines, just one page, but the words were enough. They weren't confessions. They weren't even explicit. Just fragments of thoughts, little half-sentences about someone who made her feel seen, about the danger of belonging to someone who was never yours to begin with. She never named him. She didn't have to. I put the notebook back and never spoke of it again. That night, I sat alone on the balcony, the sky wide and dark above me. I could hear them laughing from the living room, not far behind. It wasn't bitter, their laughter. That was the hardest part. It was soft, familiar. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. I laid out the plates. I poured the coffee. I watched them eat together, side by side. Their movements mirrored like dancers who knew every beat. And I smiled, not because I was fine, but because smiling was easier than unraveling, because sometimes love doesn't end in screaming or slammed doors. Sometimes it ends in silence, in knowing, in letting go before you are forced to.